Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. I've got one of my favorite people in the whole wide world with me tonight. And I got to tell you, it's been a rip. My guest is Susun Weed, herbalist, author, lecturer, teacher. I don't know what you want to call her, but you can call her everything. We're going to talk about the 3 traditions of health. And I would like to welcome back Susun Weed. Susun.
Oh, Barrie, it's so wonderful to be here with you again. Yes, you know, at each one of our other shows, we've briefly mentioned the 3 traditions. And I find it so fascinating to use this as a paradigm for understanding where people are coming from. Because healthcare can be confusing, can't it?
Especially now with our healthcare changing rapidly as we speak.
And we have access to everything all over the world, you know. You can get something from Tibet, you can get something from India, something from China. You know, somebody says, oh, you should have this. No, you should have that. You should do acupuncture. No, you should eat this. And people can get very confused. So I like to see if I can clear up that confusion a little bit.
Sounds good to me.
And thinking about the 3 traditions, I think, helps us to clear up that confusion. Now, when I was a little girl, the most important day of the entire year involved new clothing, all new clothing.
Oh.
New underwear, new socks, new shoes, new dress, and then I was taken for my annual physical exam. And the doctor did things that no other adult did to me, and at the end of this would turn to my mother and say, she's in good health.
Wow.
So I learned one of the most important things that I ever learned about health right there as a child, and that was that I have nothing to do with it.
Very interesting.
That it's all in the hands of the doctor and the adults, and that I'm not really part of it. And then after declaring me to be in perfect health, the doctor would give me a shot.
A shot for what?
A vaccine.
Ah, he had made his money.
All right? A booster shot, right? So I learned the second most important thing that there was to know about health, and that is you can't be healthy without drugs. Now, you may think that I'm exaggerating, but in fact, look at how many people actually actively believe both of these things. He just had somebody at a party walk up to me and start talking to me about their health problem and tell me, the doctor put me on these drugs. And I said, really? What an amazing doctor you have. The doctor went to the drugstore, got the prescription filled, and then comes to your house and gives you a pill every day? She said, no, I got the prescription filled. I said, well, maybe you're taking the drugs. Maybe the doctor didn't put you on the drugs. But we still are 3-year-olds believing that health has nothing to do with us. So this is the scientific tradition. The scientific tradition measures us. What's your cholesterol? What's your weight? What's your height? What's your blood pressure? What's your vision? What's your hearing? We're going to measure you. What's your C-reactive protein, right? Anything going wrong, we're going to measure you. We're going to use our diagnostic tools to measure you and see where you don't measure up. And then we're going to fix you. And we'll fix you by making your measurements be the same as the measurements that we've decided are okay. Now, there was a period about 10 years ago when suddenly an enormous number of people in the United States were diagnosed with high blood pressure. How come?
That's strange.
Because the measurements were changed.
Oh.
What was defined as high blood pressure changed. So that people who previously had measured up now didn't measure up and were candidates for drugs. So it's not as though there's some inscription from some mount in Jerusalem, right, that says, your blood pressure shall be thus. And if you actually look historically, you'll see enormous changes in thinking about what blood pressure should be and if it should change as we age. The drugs that are currently given to reduce blood pressure, unfortunately, interfere with your sexuality.
Oh, interesting. It inhibits you.
Very much so, and physically inhibiting too. Because after all, let's think about it. Sexuality is about engorged tissues. And engorged tissues require blood pressure. And if you're taking a drug that lowers blood pressure, it's very difficult to get engorged. It's very difficult to get interested, in fact, right? When I was writing the section on, how come I'm not interested, and many women postmenopausally say, I'm just not interested anymore, I was shocked to discover how many drugs inhibit sexual interest. And so here we are aging, all right? We already have to have our 7 orgasms a week, as we talked about before, to keep desire flowing. And now we're starting to be told, oh, your blood pressure is too high, you need to take these drugs, and that has a further inhibiting effect. In fact, there are safe, simple, easy, effective herbs that can moderate blood pressure and help you be more interested sexually. We don't need to have drugs, but the scientific tradition, because it measures and fixes, likes to use drugs.
Well, how are the pharmaceutical companies going to make money if you don't use their drugs?
Well, I'm not against drugs.
Okay.
I'm against needless use of drugs. Right, which is one of the reasons we're talking about high blood pressure. Right? Somebody's an insulin-dependent diabetic, I suggest they take their insulin. Somebody does not have their thyroid, I suggest they take their thyroid medication. But there are drugs that are being prescribed right now for which there is no valid scientific basis. How many women in America right now are taking a statin drug to lower their cholesterol? And there is no study of any kind that has ever shown that taking a statin drug will reduce a woman's risk of a heart attack or a stroke.
Well, let me ask you, what would you suggest somebody take if they have high cholesterol to reduce it?
I wouldn't reduce it. The higher a woman's cholesterol, the longer she will live.
And this is because...
Cholesterol is a precursor to hormones, especially estrogen. Women need more cholesterol in their blood as they age.
Oh, really?
In fact, after the age of 70, the amount of cholesterol in a woman's blood is probably the best gauge we have of how much longer she'll live.
So, in your experience, what is the figures for cholesterol or something?
Well, I don't, again, you're asking a scientific tradition question.
Sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. What is the measurement, right? And that also has changed, right? So what I'm asking is a somewhat different question.
Okay.
Which is, first of all, has the cholesterol hypothesis ever been proven? And the answer is no.
Oh,
there is no evidence that lowering cholesterol, except in a very small, particular subset of people, will reduce the risk of heart attack or stroke. We can lower cholesterol, and so we have this cholesterol myth that cholesterol leads to heart attack, but it doesn't. And there isn't evidence to show that inflammation leads to heart attack. You can have somebody with very low cholesterol, but high inflammation, and they're more likely to have a heart attack than someone who has very high cholesterol and no inflammation. You met my sweetheart.
Yes.
For years and years and years, his total cholesterol was over 400.
Whoa.
Right. Now, right as we speak, what we're being told is that we're looking for total cholesterol around 200, and in some people they even like to bring it down under that. Right. So doctors would tell him, you're a heart attack waiting to happen. Go away. You're going to die on me, But he comes from Italian ancestry, which tends to produce a lot of cholesterol. We went on a cholesterol-free diet. No shrimp, no lobster, no butter, nothing with cholesterol in it. Over a 3-month period, we dropped his cholesterol 3 points.
Whoa.
Wasn't worth it.
No.
It wasn't worth it at all, right? Because he's making that cholesterol. It's not coming in from his food. Right, so again, this is part of that cholesterol myth. Now, he never had a heart attack. He did elect to have some medical intervention, and that intervention was a triple bypass.
And he did this because?
He did this because he was feeling short of breath. He's an actor.
Okay.
And he was playing Bottom, and he was in the donkey suit in the summer.
Oh.
And he felt like he couldn't breathe, right? And so they said, well, let's take a look at what's going on with your blood vessels. And I said, my goodness, 3 of your blood vessels, and there's 4 primary blood vessels that go from the lungs to the heart, and 3 of those were over 75% blocked. And they said to him, well, we're going to have to, do the bypass. And this is the blood that oxygenates and feeds the heart muscle. So although you'll feel better, some of your heart is already like,
bad news.
Bad news. It's like it's dead because it hasn't been getting this. After the surgery, after he came out of the anesthesia, the surgeon came into his room and said, you've got some explaining to do. He says, I've done this operation at least 4,000 times. He said, I held your living heart in my hand. It is the healthiest heart I've ever seen in my life. There's not a single cell dead in your heart.
Wow. So what was the...
Nourishing herbal infusions, which we've been talking about, motherwort tincture, hawthorn tincture.
What is a tincture?
A tincture is an alcoholic preparation of a fresh or dried herb.
How do you make that?
Here's how we make hawthorn tincture. I have a radio show called at healthylife.net, and it's a monthly radio show, and it focuses on one herb each month. And so I was doing a show on hawthorn, and I kept hearing myself go, hawthorn for the aging heart, and hawthorn, and suddenly I'm going, you know what? Hi, you're getting older, girl, here. Look at you, you're getting older. So I said, I'm going to take some hawthorn for my aging heart. So we buy a 1/4 pound of hawthorn, dried hawthorn berries. We put them in a quart jar.
Okay.
And then we fill that jar right up to the top with 100 proof vodka. Put a lid on it, put a label on it, and wait for 6 weeks. And then it's ready to use, a dropper full a day.
The dropper full.
A dropper full.
Okay.
So
do you mix it in water, or you just...
You can just put a dropper full in water and take it that way, yeah.
Okay.
We have a cup of Earl Grey tea in the evening together. It's one of our little rituals. And we put our hawthorn tincture in our Earl Grey tea. It tastes very delicious. Hawthorn is related to the crabapple and to the cherry. And we know that these are also very heart-healthy foods. One of my live-out apprentices was a nurse. And her blood pressure was a little high, not alarmingly high, but it was a little high. And her physician wanted her to go on some blood pressure-lowering drugs, and she didn't want to. So she started taking hawthorn tincture. And within 6 weeks, she had blood pressure that was completely normal.
Now, wait a second. There's something about the cholesterol and the inflammation. Okay.
Right.
So how do you get rid of the inflammation on your blood vessels?
Linden infusion.
Okay.
Linden. I was called by a past apprentice, and she said, my doctor is worried about my cholesterol. It's high. I said, well, nobody's ever shown that cholesterol leads to heart disease or heart attack, so I'm not worried. But I would like you to go back and get tested for C-reactive protein, because that's a measure of inflammation in the blood vessels.
Okay.
And after we had talked, I remembered her. I sat and I remembered what she looked like. And they talk about the apple, which is bigger.
Right.
Right. The pear is bigger at the base, and then the apple is bigger at the top. Right. They must be thinking of a red delicious apple, which is bigger at the top there. But I think about triangles, right? And so you have the triangle bigger at the top, and that's usually the man with the big chest, and it narrows at the hips. And then the triangle that's bigger at the base is usually the woman, all right, who's bigger at the hips and narrower at the shoulders. And I'm thinking about this woman, and she's bigger at the top. She's got that big top and that narrow hips, and that's the heart problem shape, because there's more stuff going on up at the chest. And then when we talked again, she said, well, I've had my C-reactive protein tested, and it's very high. I said, okay, so now I am getting a little worried. I said, any heart disease in your family? She said, well, yeah, my mother died of a heart attack, and her grandmother died of a heart attack, both in their 50s.
Wow.
So I said, all right, we definitely have got to get your C-reactive protein down. And they just finished a trial of B vitamins, and it didn't work. They were hoping that B vitamins, special factors in B vitamins could bring it down. I said, so we're going to have to take this to Dreamtime. Dreamtime, and we'll talk again in a couple of days, and we'll see what we get from Dreamtime. Well, she called me up 2 days later, and she said, do you remember that song that my apprentice sister had about linden? I said, no, you called her, didn't you? She said, yes. Because I woke up from my dream with part of her song, just a piece of her song, running through my mind. I said, what was that? She said, Linden, Linden, heal my heart. You can bring me a brand new start. Oh, well, I smell fairies at my feet. I'm sitting under a linden tree. Bees are buzz and birds are tweet. Linden blossoms sure smell sweet. Linden, Linden, heal my heart. You can bring me a brand new start. I said, great! You start drinking linden infusion? She called me back in 2 months and she said they just measured my C-reactive protein and it's down by half.
Wow.
We talked about linden on one of the other shows that we did together. And linden is this sweet, fairy-like, well, gosh, right over in Brooklyn there's a Linden Avenue, isn't there?
Never thought about it.
And guess what's planted on Linden Avenue?
Linden trees.
That's right. And you can harvest those linden blossoms without harming the tree. There's a YouTube of me harvesting linden blossoms. They're also planted in malls.
Oh, really?
And my apprentices and I are in a mall harvesting linden blossoms. You can see it right on YouTube. And people are walking by and people are so interested. And we're saying, yes, it's an anti-inflammatory. And so many chronic problems arise from inflammation. And people are asking us, oh, how do you do this? And we're showing them and picking the blossoms. And I suddenly turn around and there's a man there with a saw. I said, and what are you doing? He said, this sounds so great. I thought I'd harvest some too by cutting off this whole branch.
Oh, no.
You don't have to cut the tree to harvest the blossom. You can just pick the blossoms. Or you could go out and buy them. Now, linden can be a little slippery. So I always buy the whole blossoms. Because if they're cut up, they make kind of a slimy infusion, and the whole blossom is much better, or harvest it yourself. Now, earlier on, you said something to me about, I don't know, these plants that I picked outside. You said, I'm not sure if I would have anything to do with these plants. After all, they're growing in a city street in Manhattan here. And what did I say to you?
You breathe the air.
Right, I said, do you live here? Do you breathe the air? And then we talked about photosynthesis. We talked about the fact that we exhale carbon dioxide, right, which is 1 carbon, 2 oxygen, CO2. And the plants take this in. And they have to cleave off an oxygen because photosynthesis starts with carbon monoxide, CO. So that 1 oxygen is a free radical. This is why plants produce antioxidants, because they have all these free radicals that they're dealing with. And that oxygen then becomes the oxygen we breathe. However, for the plant, carbon monoxide is easier and healthier than carbon dioxide, and the primary exhaust pipe gas is carbon monoxide.
So you're saying I can eat these?
Absolutely, you could eat them and that they would be healthy and good for you. Now, somebody might say, what if a dog, lifted a leg on it? And I say, urine is sterile. And in fact, in many places in the world, if you get a wound, you're safer off washing it with urine than water.
That is true, because I can vouch for that. When I stepped on some sea urchins, they said, stick your foot in a pail of urine. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't think so.
Right?
No.
And of course you can rinse it if you want to. You're not required to eat it as it is. But yes, the linden that grows in cities is perfectly safe to harvest and use. One of my dear friends was in a traumatic accident.
Aww.
And they wouldn't let us bring any flowers into the trauma unit. But it was during the time of the year when the linden was blooming. And linden was a favorite of hers. It has a wonderful smell, right? I smell fairies at my feet. I'm sitting under a linden tree. And we were able to go, this was in Toronto, we were able to go right outside the hospital, pick linden flowers from the trees blooming there, and they allowed us to bring them in and cover her in linden blossoms and that wonderful sweet smell.
Wow.
There's green blessings around us all the time. Herbal medicine is people's medicine. So the scientific tradition wants to measure and to fix. And it's a wonderful tradition, The scientific tradition can take a child with a cleft palate and repair that. And give that child a real chance at nourishment and life and a good relationship. I am not against the scientific tradition at all. But if it pushes us to have fixed blood pressure, well, that's not so good for us, is it? So we really have to
Find our way.
Find our way in there, and
Right.
that's why I include all of the possibilities in my books. Many people, and myself included, have a problem that, well, maybe science can deal with it, and maybe what science is doing isn't so good. My problem was bladder infections.
So what do you do for bladder infection?
And when I was 2, my mom had another child. Well, maybe I've forgiven her for it. I don't know. It's like, why did she need another one? She had me. And of course, we were living in the South, and you're not supposed to get mad. You're supposed to be a young lady. And so instead of getting mad, I got a bladder infection. Pissed
Whoa.
off, huh?
So-
As the bladder says, it goes round and round, but it all comes down to me. All of your anger goes down into your bladder. And I became the queen of bladder infections. Throughout
wow.
my childhood and my teenage years, anytime things weren't going the way I thought they should go for me, my body responded by getting a bladder infection. And they gave me a drug which turned my urine orange, bright orange. Now, I escaped Dallas and escaped high school and went off to UCLA. And I was eating lunch in the cafeteria one day. And this was, again, in the early 60s. And I look across the cafeteria, and there's this old woman there. She must have been 30. Now, this is very common on campuses now that you see people of all ages. But back
Then-
at that time, you didn't. The students were young, and anybody who was older wasn't going to be in the cafeteria, right?
Right.
So I, being curious, I went over and I sat next to her and I said, "What are you doing in college?" She said, "Career change." I said, "Oh, so what career did you have that's so terrible that you're changing?" She said, "I was a public health nurse."
Oh, interesting.
Doesn't sound so bad. She said, "Yeah, well, I couldn't stand seeing the women being put into kidney failure by taking a drug to resolve their bladder infections."
Oh, interesting.
And I said, "This drug that can hurt your kidneys, that they give women with bladder infections, does it turn your urine orange?" She said, "That's the one." And I said, "Oh my gosh, I've taken, a huge amount of this drug. How do I tell if my kidneys are okay?" She said, "What do you feel like when you wake up in the morning?" I said, "Like everybody, I have a backache." She says, "Everybody does not have a backache. You're what? You're 16 years old. You don't have a backache when you wake up in the morning?" I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "Your kidneys." I'm like,
Wow.
well, I mean, we all know now that the leading cause of death in industrialized countries is drugs, properly prescribed and properly used. And they kill more people than car accidents, than cancer or heart disease. We know this, but back then we didn't.
Well, I think we did, but it was all pushed under the carpet, and people weren't pushing with television and the internet and telephones and all the other electronic medias. Everything's coming out more and more, and people are becoming more, not so much inquisitive. They've always been inquisitive, but they want answers.
Yes.
They won't take the status quo,
Yes.
and that's the big difference.
So that was an enormous shock for me, Barry.
Oh, I can imagine.
Because, of course, it was like my childhood was on, wow, we've discovered antibiotics and we are going to eliminate all infectious disease and drugs are wonderful. And really, that was like the whole thing of my childhood, and we're inoculating against these childhood diseases, and it was just, we were going to eliminate disease on the planet. And here I was being told that a drug had harmed me. It was stunning.
I bet you were ready to thrash a few people.
No, it didn't occur to me to be upset. It occurred to me to be curious about what else could I do, because I knew I was going to get another bladder infection, and I wasn't going to take that drug. What else could I do? Well, what happened before I found out was that I moved to Manhattan.
Aha.
But I still had that question. So I found myself one day walking up all those steps between the stone lions and going in and saying, "Do you have any books on herbs?" And people say to me, "Why did you ask about books on herbs?" And for years and years I said, "I don't know, I just asked about books on herbs." And then one of my aunts told me that my great-grandmother was the village herbalist in a village in Switzerland.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
So she must have been, like...
Reincarnated in you.
Right. pulling my chain and going, herbs, idiot, herbs, go to herbs, herbs, up those stairs between the stone lines and go out. So there were 4 books in the Manhattan Main Branch Public Library on herbs in 1965.
Wow.
I've now written more.
I'd say so.
Had I stayed in college and been able to read German or French or other languages, there would have been more books. But there were only 4 in English, right? And 3 of them told me to put basil with my tomatoes and dill with my cucumbers. It's very good advice.
Interesting. I do that all the time.
But it's not the advice I was looking for, was it?
Right.
Right? It was great advice. So what happened was that I had to move to the country and start growing my own herbs.
Oh.
Because I could find
Fresh
so
herb.
little about them. And then Ewell Gibbons came on the scene, and then Juliet de Berkeley-Levy. And then suddenly we had another herbal renaissance in America. And as my mama said to me, she said, boy, if you had to choose 3 things that would really be important in the 21st century, women, herbs, and health are 3 good choices, Susan.
You hit a home run.
I had definitely hit a home run, but it was because of my own curiosity. Now, what I found as I began to explore was the heroic tradition.
The heroic?
The heroic tradition. The heroic tradition basically tells us that whatever is happening is our own fault. And there's a kind of comfort in that.
All right.
Because if whatever is happening is your own fault, then you can
Fix it.
you can change it. That's right. You can clean up your act. You can balance it out. You can do something. Whereas the scientific tradition says it's out of your control. You didn't cause it and you can't cure it. You have to let us do it.
Right.
Right? So we feel kind of powerless in the scientific tradition. We go off looking for power, and we get a whole lap full of power. You caused it. You caused your cancer. You caused your incontinence. And you're the one who has to do the right thing.
And take all this medication.
And take all these supplements, right?
Right.
Because now we're talking people who don't have licenses to prescribe drugs, so they use what I call soft drugs.
Supplements.
Exactly. You know, there's not any study that has shown that taking supplements increases longevity, decreases chronic disease, or decreases acute disease. In fact, in the largest meta-study done to date, looking at the supplementation habits of over 8 million people in North America and Europe, they found that supplement takers live less long.
Ooh, I don't like that. I take supplements.
Don't.
Okay, so
Here's my 3-step program for optimum health.
Okay.
Throw away your supplements or wrap them up and give them to someone you don't like very much. A little revenge is always sweet. All right? So don't take your supplements. Stop drinking water.
I drink water all the time.
And instead, drink nourishing herbal infusions.
Okay.
Now, my apprentice Kayla went home to Kansas City, Kansas, and said, throw away your supplements, stop drinking water, drink nourishing herbal infusions. And they said, poor Kayla, she went to Woodstock and lost her mind. So Kayla said, try this experiment. Get 2 houseplants that are the same. Treat them the same.
Right.
Except one of them you're going to water with water, and the other one you're going to water with nourishing herbal infusion.
I hate to cut this conversation short.
Have we?
We ran out of time.
Oh, my gosh.
And I've got so many other questions I want to ask you. But in the closing moments of the show, Susan, what would you like to leave the audience with?
What do you suppose happens? And actually, we want to make this fair. The plant that you water with water, put one of each supplement that you take on a daily basis in the soil. The plant that's watered with the infusions thrives. The one you give the supplements to is going to die. Nourishing herbal infusions. Green blessings are everywhere. Herbal medicine. It's people's medicine. It's right outside your door. You start with one plant. You don't have to be an expert. Children learn herbal medicine. Come and visit me at SusanWeed.com or check out YouTube's. You'll see my granddaughter starting to make herbal preparations when she was 18 months old. She's 5 years old now. She goes out and picks remedies in the lawn.
Oh, my God. This is so phenomenal. And I live in Manhattan. I guess I'm going to have to do some foraging in Central Park. Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Barrie. Green blessings.
Thank you. And where are you going to go foraging for your herbal remedies? Look forward to hearing from you. Write us here at The Woman's Connection. Bye now.